Today, we're taking a look at the issues in Chapter 3, which is understanding the origins of gender. So I always like to begin this chapter and this lecture with a very important quote. So when we take a look at our opening slide, this quote is from a very famous 20th century feminist and philosopher. Her name is Simone de Beauvoir. And the quote you see on the slide is, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So what Beauvoir is arguing in this slide, right, is that society, right, our culture, right, creates gender. So you know from chapter 1 and from earlier lectures that this is a concept that we know as the social construction of gender. So before we go into this next slide here and we explain a little more in depth of what Beauvoir really goes on to argue, let's give you a little more background info in terms of where she is coming from. Okay, so Beauvoir, brilliant philosopher. If you've ever taken philosophy, or maybe you will be taking philosophy a little bit later, you will learn about Beauvoir. And this quote and the arguments I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes are coming from this groundbreaking work called The Second Sex, right? The Second Sex. Now, this book was published in France. She is French. She was French. Originally in 1947, translated into English in 1949. And she hung out with the existentialist philosophers, Sartre, if you've ever heard of Sartre, and the School of Existentialist Thought. So this is right after World War II. You can imagine this time period. Excuse me. And many of these modern philosophers, right, were very advanced in their thinking in terms of truly, right, what is the meaning of life after living through all the horrors of World War I and World War II. But when it comes to this work in particular, right, The Second Sex, what is Beauvoir arguing? What is she looking at? And good Lord, why is this book so dense, right? 700 pages. Well, what Beauvoir argues ultimately, right? She wanted to know who she was. Who she was. A truly fundamental question. What did it mean to be a woman in the middle of the 20th century? What does it mean? Okay. So that original slide, and I probably jumped ahead on my slides just a little bit too quickly, right? She went and she looked throughout history, and I do mean all of history. That's why we've got 700 pages. And she looked at how cultures understood the position of women within the society, right? So she looked to ancient Rome, she looked to ancient Greece, she in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, and she looked to philosophy, and she looked at history and literature, right? All these different disciplines, and to understand and really break down, deconstruct, very 20th century term, deconstruct, the position of women within their society. And ultimately, and brilliantly, she argued that what it meant to be a woman in all of those societies and contemporary 20th century society is that woman was always defined not in her own subjectivity, not in terms of who she actually is or was, but always in relationship to man. Man was always the subject, and woman was always in opposition, always defined in opposition to man, the subject. So woman was always seen as the other. Woman was always seen as the other. She was the secondary, the second sex. And that each culture, right, each society would come up with their understanding of what it meant to be a woman. Uh, very sophisticated understandings of that. And then the second part of the book, right, she takes a look at what it meant to be a woman, excuse me, in contemporary Europe at that time, contemporary society. So today, we uh, we sociologists, social scientists have used her groundbreaking, and these were groundbreaking arguments, right? And now we think of these ideals in a more reductive form, and the idea of gender being a social construction. She laid that down, that original format. So, sorry, I did drink water before. One of her um, very strong arguments, right, is that when she looked throughout history as to why it was that women were so often held back historically, okay, is that men often argued that women had physically smaller bodies, okay? And because women's bodies were smaller physically, they were therefore, okay, weaker and should not be able to have all the rights that men were. And the arguments went, well, women's bodies are physically weaker. Their brains must be smaller. They reproduce. So that's all that they should be limited to. Okay? And she, Beauvoir, argued, okay, if this has been the historical argument, right, that women's biology is their destiny, right, because all throughout history, this has been the standard argument within patriarchal societies. She challenges that. And this is setting aside the fact that men throughout history never, ever accurately understood women's biology. Now, we will be looking at all of this. We have a whole unit in a couple of weeks looking at women's health, okay? And no one will dispute that women and men have different biologies. That's fine. That's true. We do have different biologies. Okay? They're designed to do different things, but that doesn't mean we're intellectually inferior. Okay? So our slide here, when we take a look at biology and culture, right, Beauvoir noted that feminism challenges the idea, right, that biology equals destiny for women. That's what she put out. That biology does not equal destiny for women, simply because women can have the ability to reproduce where men do not, right? Doesn't mean we are the intellectual inferiors. We can indeed be intellectually equal, as she so deftly proved. All right, so let's take a look at, and this is what I always ask students to do. Usually we're in a live class together and we have a couple of minutes doing a fun in-class exercise. Your textbook asks you, there's a little learning activity you can do inside the textbook. asks you to think about contemporary notions of masculinity and femininity. So I will ask you, just in your own minds right now, right? Think of some of the adjectives that come to mind when thinking of someone or something that is masculine. Right? And I even put up a few little well, they're not Legos. I think those are Fisher Price toys, right? Are construction workers. And an adjective is a descriptive word. Right? And in your mind, you probably have lots of words that come to mind when you think of someone or something that is masculine. What words would you use to describe those? Now, and if you want, just even jot those down. Five little words. When you think of someone or something that is masculine. And, right, we're going to flip it around, do the exact same thing. What adjectives come to mind when thinking of someone or something that is feminine? Now I put up the little image here to help you of the easy bake oven. I always joke with students. I know when I was a kid, I had an easy bake oven. It was probably the only truly, in quotes, feminine toy I ever had. I loved that easy bake oven. Oh my God. I loved making the little cakes, that little brownie mix. And they always came out, half raw because let's face it, there's only so much you can do when you are cooking with the wattage of a little light bulb. Okay? So again, when you think of someone or something that is feminine, what are some of the words that came to mind? Okay, jot down 5 of those or so, right? You're writing them down. Okay. Now, the reason I always have students do this, right, is because there will be a lot of words that you have thought of, okay, and ideals, right, notions and concepts that have been traditionally and historically associated with masculinity and femininity that have always been with us, always been with us. And that is not a coincidence, not at all. See, I am a historian and I don't believe in coincidences. Nothing is coincidental, except for when maybe you run into your friend at the grocery store. Now that's a coincidence. Okay. But when it comes to social phenomenon, cultural phenomenon, nothing is a coinky dinky. Okay, and let's take a look why that is so. Let's, as our textbook explains, okay, let's take a look at masculinity. So this slide has a lot of information on it. Okay, let's first take a look at the symbol. This is the, you probably recognize it today as well. This symbol, it's an international symbol used to represent men. Okay, and underneath we see it is also the symbol, right, that the Romans used, right, and it was their symbol for Mars, who was the Roman god of war. The Roman god of war. Now, today, right, common associations with masculinity, right, are constructed from classical traits. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of you, when you thought of someone who was masculine, right, masculinity, you probably had notions that verged somewhere on intelligence, smart, uh, courage, right? I bet you had brave, strong, brave, intelligence, smart, okay, honesty, okay, right? These are all classical traits And when we say classical, we mean it in the pure classic Roman Greek sense. Centuries and centuries. This was how classical Rome defined masculinity. Okay? Intelligence, courage, honesty. And this trait here, right? In addition to machismo, machismo is when we think of brusque masculinity, that really hard ruggedness, okay, that non-emotive, right? And students often think about when they think of someone who's masculine, they don't show emotions, okay? Um, it is the idea of not being feminine, not being a woman, right? It is the antithesis of femininity. So these ideas, right, even today, right, they are coming straight from classical notions of Greece and Rome that have been with us ever since, millennia, right? So what you see today on television, Bond, James Bond, okay, still with us. Let's take a look at femininity. Okay. So this sign, I'm sure many of you have seen this sign before. This is the woman's sign. Okay. And again, it represents Venus, who Romans referred to as the god of love, the god of love. Now, when we see these adjectives, right, I bet many of you had very similar descriptives when you think of someone or something who is feminine. Passivity. Someone is feminine, they're domestic, they're nurturing, they're emotional, they're delicate, they're frilly, they're soft. Okay. All of these ideas, okay, again, been around for centuries. Okay. Women are under these ideas, right? We're supposed to be this way. Now I'm going to challenge you. Okay? Remember, this is our goal this week. Everything that we thought we knew about gender, we thought we knew about masculinity and femininity, I'm going to ask you to really rethink this. Passivity, domesticity, nurturing, emotional, dependent, delicate. What does this have to do with biology? Nothing. Are any of these traits, are we born with any of this? We are not. But culture, okay, culture and society, right, says this is how young girls should be, this is how women should be. And the same thing is true with men, okay? Right? That men should be brave and they should be the ones who are intelligent because for centuries and centuries and centuries, who gets the education? Men do. Okay. When young boys fall and they get hurt in the playground, what do we say to them? Brush it off, be a man. When the young girl falls and gets hurt in the playground, we say, oh, honey, baby, come here, honey, your little boo-boo will kiss. We treat them completely differently because we have different expectations of what a young girl should experience and feel and what a kindergarten boy should feel and experience. And it's built into us. Right? And we don't think about that. Right? So let's build a little bit more on your vocabulary. In terms of societal expectations, I'm going to take a sip of water here. Let's introduce you into the concept of what um, is known as the uh, Madonna and the Madonna whore dichotomy. Okay, so um, this it's a false dichotomy, okay, a false choice. But this dichotomy has been around, has existed for millennia, and it identifies women as one of two extreme opposites. Women are represented as either all good or all evil. And as you see on the slide and the definition, this stereotype has hampered women for centuries. Okay? And it appears in literature, in music, in fine arts. We see it in television, in countless variations. So let me explain it a little bit further. Here we have the Madonna. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with religious history, okay, the Madonna is Christ's mother. Okay, she's always referred to as the Madonna, who represents purity, right? Because of the miraculous virgin birth. She is all pure. Okay? She is without sin, and she can do nothing wrong. So, a lot of times when we look to culture and how women are represented, sometimes they are represented as purely all good. But on the other side, and more often than the Madonna representation, right, we see a woman represented as the whore, right, who is Eve, right, from the Garden of Eden. Okay, Eve, who is seen as the temptress, the seducer. Okay. Now, if you are familiar with the story in Genesis, okay, we see Eve, we see Adam, and here is the tree of knowledge. Now, I was very specific when I chose this imagery because usually what happens is you can walk into any museum anywhere. In fact, I put forth a little challenge, right? It's easy for you to Google, right? Go to Google, type up images of the Garden of Eden. Pull it up right now. Okay, when you get off of this, or just put me on pause. You know, isn't that kind of nice? You get to put me on pause. Pause. And image Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and you'll see all kinds of representations that look like this. But there aren't that many where you see this. Okay, now here is Lucifer. And if you know the story, right, the basic story of the fall of mankind, the story goes, right, God told Adam and Eve when they were in paradise, okay, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Do not eat from the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Okay. But Eve was seduced by Lucifer, the devil. Okay? And Lucifer beguiled, that is the language, beguiled Eve to eat from the fruit. So you see, she reaches up, she takes the fruit, she takes a bite because she is under the spell of Lucifer, right? And she hands it to Adam. And then Adam eats, right? And they are expelled from the garden, right? And all hell breaks loose, quite literally, right? It's the fall of mankind. They're kicked out of paradise, and it all goes downhill from there. And for women in particular, well, there are a lot of problems, right? This is why, if you read the Bible and you are a literalist, right? This is why women shall, quote, suffer in childbirth, right? This is why women have labor pains. Okay. Um, so uh, the reason I chose this image, right, is to make a very specific point. And we do have a whole week on women and religion. It's one of our last weeks. We'll take a look at all of this. God told both Adam and Eve, do not eat from the fruit. Yes? Right. Now, Adam heard that. Eve heard that. Okay. But Eve was not acting of her own accord. Now, if you are a spiritual person, and I don't assume that all students are, but if you are a spiritual person, then you usually believe that one of the greatest gifts God gave to mankind was free will. And so Eve was not acting of free will because she was beguiled by Lucifer. So that's why she ate of the fruit. Now she hands the fruit to Adam, but why then does Adam take it? He is a free will. What's his excuse? Huh. Yet men are not blamed for all the problems thereafter, only women. Isn't that convenient? Think about that. All right. Some things to keep in mind. Right? We'll start to wrap up this video for this week. When it comes to the issues of gender and culture, okay, the relationship between gender, culture, and biology becomes a little complicated. Okay? There are two things to keep in mind, as I've pointed out in the slides. Okay? There is greater gender diversity, right, than before. Right? Some are male or female, but others are both female and male at the same time. I've assigned a very good short TEDx video on the experiences of an intersex person this week. Okay. And second point here, biology and culture as it relates to gender are interconnected. And you cannot talk about one without the other, right? Because how we understand biology, right? I biologically am a cisgendered woman, and I identify that way. And culture has had a huge influence on me. Okay. And how I am supposed to act, and how I'm supposed to dress, and how I'm supposed to be. Okay. Now, one of the assigned essays, and in fact, I think it might be the first assigned, supplemental essays this week, is by Judith Lorber, and looking at the social construction of gender. And her essay is very good because it helps us really understand how and why societies pay such attention to gender. And she argues that gender involves the process of multiple patterns of interactions that are created and recreated between human interactions, right? The way young children interact with one another at a very early age, it helps young human beings identify and process things. Okay? And gender as a concept is performed daily over and over and over again. And sometimes that performance is unconscious, most of the times, actually. It's unconscious, we don't think about it. Okay. Other times it is very conscious. Some theorists argue that contemporary constructions of gender are a culmination of everything other than biology, right? It's everything that our society, our contemporary society, has said goes into creating femininity, goes into creating masculinity. Um, and for those individuals who choose to ignore, consciously reject all of that, those individuals, right? Transgender. I don't want to do. You know what? That is not for me. Right? I am consciously going beyond what society expects of a particular assignment. Right? Lastly, our editors note femininities and masculinities are performed by bodies, right? In a series of repetitive acts that we take for granted and tend to see as natural as we do gender. These practices are always shaped by discourses or regimes of truth that give these actions meaning. Right? So the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we stand, the way we sit, the way we hold our bodies, okay? And what has been culturally sanctioned. Okay? Um, these are giving off signals and messages. And the larger cultural society has agreed, has assigned what is appropriate for certain genders, right? To do. One final note, an interesting note, I've just uploaded a piece into this week's lesson folder on gender reveal parties. I read yesterday that out in California, a gender reveal party using explosives, explosives, oh, a gender reveal party, boom, set off yet a massive, deadly wildfire. California is suffering through hundreds of wildfires right now, and this is not the first time this has happened. In fact, there have been numerous times within the last several years where deadly, lethal wildfires have been set off um, due to the rise in these gender reveal parties. And the woman who initially started this has now come out publicly saying she's sorry she ever started this. So take a look at that piece and think about the larger concepts. This is a very good example of how our society is so entrenched in gender identity. What does it mean for us as a society to be so absorbed that we have to know even before a baby is born what the gender of that child is, right? And we have to tell everyone, and we have to have a big party. And unfortunately, there have been some devastating consequences because of that. Why can't we just have the simple joy of celebrating a child being born and letting that child be whatever that child is going to be? and just celebrating the joy of your child and God willing, a healthy child with your family. Just something to really think about. I was speaking to this with my spouse, and my spouse made a really good point. She pointed out that it's interesting that we have seen the rise in these gender reveal parties over the last decade at a time when our society has also become actually, on one side of the spectrum, more accepting of gender fluidity. Um, could this be a little bit of a backlash to that? Maybe. I don't have any answers to that, but it is certainly very interesting. And it definitely shows the significance of people needing to feel that gender is something that has to be a rooted, definite rooted aspect in our lives. Okay, have a good week.